I started at zero and I went to the top of my industry. And in this video, it's going to be unfiltered advice for anyone who wants to do the same. Allow me to walk through my journey, and I guarantee that you'll see the steps, the actions, decisions, and other considerations that I went through, where you can see the exact step-by-step blueprint of how I went from zero to how I got there. But more importantly, I'll be sharing my mistakes that I had to go through, for better or worse, where if you know what not to do, you can get to your path that much faster. The craziest thing I learned about all this is that once you know how to conquer it in one field, you can literally take that same process, that same framework, and apply it to any other different industry. With that, let's get straight into it. In the beginning, this was 2007, February, and unbeknownst to me at the time, I basically stumbled upon this middle school talent show where I was attending, and I saw this performance. It was my friend and his brother, and they were beatboxing on stage. I looked at it with awe and I was like, holy crap, this is pretty cool. And so later I asked him, hey, like, how do you do, what you were doing on stage? And he tried teaching me the basics, which I couldn't grasp at the time. But the point is, that was like the seed that was instilled in me, which would change literally the rest of my life. Before we get too deep into this story, what I want you to pay attention to is kind of the elements slash mindset regarding certain kind of decisions, whether they were naive, maybe strategic, maybe very poignant and chosen, and also maybe things that happened on a whim, because all of this really comes together soon enough. And it can impact you directly in your own journey. The timing of this was very important. This was hardly a week before my whole family was about to move to India. I went to India for high school. I was there for 5 years. And the reason this is important is because when I got there, although, yeah, by blood I'm Indian, culturally, I was American. I was definitely a little bit of an outcast. At the same time, you could say, because I went to an international school over there, things were a little softer than not. Point being, other than, kind of getting bullied and kind of the usual things that happen, let's say in high school environments, the thing was, because it was an international school and because the one thing I remembered myself as, hey, I'm 12 years old, I'm from America, and what I remember about America was literally, it was equivalent to everything beatbox. There's a lot of other elements, but that was like the one thing I was like, okay, I took this one thing and I just ran with it in the sense of identifying myself as someone who beatboxes. Going to international school in India, the benefit was regarding beatbox was a crazy coincidence of South Korea having its own cultural kind of focus with everything hip hop at that time, whether it was breakdancing, and that included beatboxing. I was just learning, kind of fooling around, playing around, and what I got to know is that a few of my peers from Korea were into beatboxing as well. So till now, I basically saw something, tried to replicate it, and then with this kind of community I never asked for, I was like, wait, I'm not the only one who's doing this, and this is pretty cool. And more than cool, it was basically an opportunity for us to grow and become better as people who beatboxed in general. At that moment in time, I didn't know how vital and important that could have been, whether it's my mental health, my growth trajectory, and all these things. But the point is, the physical community around me were a bunch of students and I was learning a bunch of things, but this thing called beatbox also had its kind of slot or vertical for me to focus that attention and for people to be kind of attracted to, hey, what am I learning after, hey, like, what's this weird stuff you're doing with your mouth and all these things? After the fact, it was like, okay, hey, there's something to be kind of learned here. And it kind of spread through wildfire where the whole school, I'm not going to say, would start a beatbox. At the same time, physical community wise, when I went to school every day, there was kind of this iteration of, hey, somebody learned something, they shared it with me. I learned something, I shared it with them. And there was this kind of, you could say, network effect, for lack of a better term. And the international school I went to was a K through 12. It wasn't just like 4 years of folks. So from that regard, you have folks that are really young and then older folks learning it too, and then teachers got involved as well. I say all of this because online at the time, and now we're talking, let's say 2007, 8, 9, around that region, there were online forums where basically you read details of like how to do certain sounds and how to do certain things. And there were certain specific beatbox forums, and more than that was kind of where YouTube came in. A big inspiration for me to make this video was because I literally learned so much from YouTube, and I was like, wait a second, this is crazy that I can share this lesson because I went from zero to literally that top echelon. So getting into more details here, I was seeing videos online, I was watching them, I was trying to replicate, and I was just mind blown left, right, center, just how magic basically is really magical, if it's performed very well and otherwise. Point being here, I would binge watch YouTube videos of beatboxing and beatbox adjacent stuff where people, would play music and a beatbox on top of it. And of course, your a cappella kind of side of things and everything related to beatboxing. So at this point, we passed 2007, 8, 9. Now we're in like 2010, let's say. And in around this area, so 2010, 11, you're talking, let's say I was in maybe 10th, 11th grade. So I finished high school in 2012 and then went on to college, which we'll get there. And right before then, there was a physical community outside of my school where it was basically the city where I was, Hyderabad. And in that city, there was this Hyderabad beatbox community. The reason I shout this out is because that was basically my first proof of concept, irrespective of how much money anyone could make anywhere. It's pretty much that feeling and how people really say it, hey, that first penny or that first dollar, the way you make it, you're going to remember it. And it was me not even being, 18, and really I was in high school and in India in that environment, beatbox or doing it was kind of very much seemed like low class, where it's like, dude, what are you doing? This is not a real skill. You're making these sounds with your mouth, which is could be rude, disrespectful, just not elegant, etc. It wasn't considered like real music or a talent or anything at the time. So the reason this matters is because one of the first ways that I got paid was, if you're aware, Indian weddings and the culture of Indian weddings are like huge. And so with that, we actually, the Hyderabad beatbox community at the time, it was a few of us doing like a mashup of beatboxing, together essentially, and then having some solo stuff in between. But the point is, back then, and it was a big deal, and people can laugh today, but we got paid 500 rupees each, which 500 rupees back then at 50 rupees a dollar approximately, plus or minus, we're talking like $10. And in high school, that was a lot of money to me. In India, the $10 equivalent, that 500 rupees, you could buy, let's say, a chips packet for 20 rupees. So you could get 25 chips packets this way. And, cool drinks, aka soft drinks, aka soda, and items like this. So it was a lot of money and it felt like a lot back then. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the principle that, hey, this is possible. A proof of concept was given. And apart from this, beatboxing in general is a pretty, you could say, extrovert type of activity in the sense, you can do it alone, but in the end, if you're performing or willing to perform, which for me at the time, I also love to act, both film, TV, as well as theater. So for me, I would put myself out there without even realizing I was putting myself out there. This meant that apart from kind of the structured events or kind of what you would think is the normal path to get from A to B to C, I was basically going as an underage person who may or may not need to be escorted to these clubs, which may be, let's say, 18 plus, 21 plus. I was this like 14, 15-year-old going to clubs and just, going at it for even 5 minutes. But I got mad respect from the DJ. But the real thing here is that I was exposed to environments that I could have never planned for at a young age. We're still in India, and this is before 2012. And kind of the summary of what I can say that was really important in this time frame was, apart from being exposed to different environments just organically because I was just willing to be there, people wanted me there. It was a great, kind of win-win situation. In more than that, it was me going to international school and just happening to be there and then being just who I was myself. At that school, there were billionaires, and I'm talking like hundreds of millionaires plus billionaire kind of net worth in terms of the families that, of those kids who were basically going there, and inclusive movie actors, politicians, etc. So all of this to say that just me being myself and, at that time being even younger, it wasn't about like, oh, let me network with you, bro, and let me, make a deal with you 10 years from now. And none of that stuff, it was basically just naivety, pure friendship, pure just no strings attached. It was just me being myself. And that was just a great vibe. But more than a great vibe, what I took away was that anything is possible. Beatbox was almost a way for me to enter, kind of open the door, kind of like, oh, okay, this guy's cool, he does what he does, his personality is what it is. But then on the other side, when you notice maybe, hey, certain kids have the equivalent of 50 grand cash, in rupees equivalent, like next to their bedside, totally normal, just take a stack, go out. And when you're younger, it's not all about, blowing out at the club and like doing all these things that, traditionally people associate with a lot of money at different clubs. It was just having access to something that was normalized for those folks. And for many others, like that's not normal. We're almost at 2012 here, where I basically graduated high school. And right before this, basically including the acting background and the beatboxing that I love to do, I was also exposed to people of a certain age group as well. The reason this matters is really simply put, imagine you're a 15-year-old and you're hanging out with 30-year-olds or 25-year-old plus. Yeah, sure, there's not all the things in common, and they're allowed to do certain things at the time legally that, when you're younger, you just can't. At the same time, there's a mindset slash wavelength and what you also kind of just absorb their energies, their thoughts, kind of what they're talking about. And it's almost like you get access to almost like a mastermind, for lack of a better term, of just people that are also in it to win it in their own regard. And they're a lot older. So the way they think, the way they talk, the way, they strategize about certain things, I got exposed to that very early on in the one of the best ways ever, if not something priceless, basically. From an acting, TV, film perspective, definitely that's where, those connections and those kind of people, definitely that helped me in my life. But when it comes to something that I feel that I did, hey, more on my own terms, on my own merit, all those things, that's what I attribute to beatbox. And that's why I'm making this video today, to give you how I got from where I started to where you can definitely be exactly where you want to be. So now it's 2011 or so, I'm applying to college. And in my college essay, at the time, I was like, hey, I'm South India's #1 beatboxer. And at the time, whether you call it formal processes or how many other competitors were there, I truly thought like, hey, more than me thinking I'm the best, there were official competitions, but from a bigger, zoomed out kind of picture, you could say, hey, I'm the best, yo-yo person. I'm the best Rubik's Cube person. And before the internet, you can't really verify what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean I wasn't the best. That just means I knew for sure I was South India's best at the time, which, to each their own if that's not a big deal or not. But I was pretty sure maybe I'm not the whole country of India's best, for example. The reason this matters is that was basically my label in addition to all these other high school activities, which today kids are probably doing crazy things to get into college. And so to get into college, it was in my essay that, hey, this is one of my achievements, this is what I did, yada, yada, yada. And so I got into school, into Georgia Tech specifically in Atlanta, Georgia, if it mattered. And over there was kind of the next step of this industry progression. At Georgia Tech, I started the beatbox club, you could say. It's called shout out to GT Buzzbeats. The point being that that name basically just was crowdsourced. But what's important here is that I basically went in and I was just being myself again, very open, just like, oh yeah, what do you like to do? Oh, I like to beatbox. Or at that time I was a bit, younger and more like I would ask people, hey, what do you like to do? Just for me to say that, Indian, oh, I like to beatbox. So it wasn't really attention seeking behavior, but clearly it was. So at that time, I was just younger, maybe less developed, mature, whatever you want to put it. But the point that I applaud my younger self, pat on the back to them, is basically that I was able to put myself out there so many times without realizing the advantage of what that would provide me without even trying later in life. The benefits of that club were basically other folks that were willing to learn. Some people were, kind of an intermediate stage, some, a little better than the others, etc. But me being like president and founder, apart from the titles, it was a community that basically existed apart from just, studying super hardcore and all these things. People were there to, again, similar to my high school experience, we were all learning from each other and getting better together faster. I learned a lot during that process where we used to perform at clubs on campus for different events. And we also were like, hey, we would love speakers or a loop station or microphones and all these things. And we were like, man, well, we have no cash, so how are we going to do this? And instead of just busking, typically where you're, on the road, let's say, just busking like, hey, donate for whatever it is or whatever cause, we weren't doing only that necessarily, but we also applied for funding. This is important because it's almost like creative financing in a different way, where basically they were like, hey, we don't give funds, and it was an on-campus organization. They don't give it to for-profit organizations. They only give it to philanthropic ones. And for us, we weren't really for-profit, but we weren't officially philanthropic. This was super important because when I basically made the case of they were so happy to give us the funds, but they were like, hey, there's this technicality. Can you please confirm? I was like, well, hey, we only perform for on campus organizations, which was true. And more than that, they all just happened to be happenstance, luckily, whatever way you want to put it, they were philanthropic in nature. So by the transitive property, I basically was like, hey guys, this is the case, super straightforward. We are basically only doing this type of work. So by default, we are basically not for profit. What do you say? Hand us over the check. The money definitely helped. It wasn't like, tens of thousands of dollars, but it was enough to get equipment, enough for people to feel like, oh, I'm beatboxing, but I'm also doing it on a mic. I'm learning how to do it as if I were actually going to, perform on stage and kind of hold your own versus just, kind of covering your mouth and doing the thing. You know what I mean? So the point of that being when we were performing in different kind of these organizational purviews, it was basically being exposed again, not just myself, but others within our group to different potential opportunities, whether they identified with that community, whether they wanted to meet us a second time. They know somebody, they're like, hey, go perform maybe for this sister chapter or like a different type of fraternity, sorority, or some type of cause. And more importantly, we got to perform, bigger than our own school. We were looking at other schools in the Atlanta area at the time, and also just side tangent of opening for really big artists just as a part of, let's say, the homecoming ceremony for Georgia Tech, but still having being exposed to that level slash caliber of talent. It kind of was at that time seeing, hey, this could be the future of not specifically beatboxing, but a performer or a musician, or how does it go, or asking those questions of talent, like how long do you sleep, how does this work, blah blah blah, like that kind of access without paying for it or scheduling time, or they know each other, or y'all know each other from back in the day. That really, time is priceless for all of us. So that commodity, if that was, is priceless in a different way. So between 2012 and 2016 was when I was in college. And in 2014, there were the American Beatbox Championships. The overall story here isn't how it became zero to the best beatboxer in the world necessarily. What it is even more than that. It's about, if you think about who creates work. So if you think about the labor market, okay, folks are working jobs, but somebody has to give them work, or in other words, money for their time to do X. So in other words, those folks that create work, in other words, let's say business owners, or the government allowing funding to happen for businesses to give it a shot. And through them giving a shot, it's basically, hey, let's hire some labor to do XYZ. So what I'm getting at is not to be the number one skilled person where you just practice, practice, practice and become number one. There's a bigger picture of how this all comes together. Going to my first American champs, this was a big deal because I was raised in America. I learned a lot of my fundamental foundational beatbox kind of things in India. And there, the internet in India at the time, if you know how internet speed works, there it was a big deal to get, let's say, 50 kbps, like 50 kilobytes per second is, it's trash. But that mattered so much back then because video streaming, going live, like Twitch streaming or YouTube live, that's like not happening. So what I'm getting at is back then there would be like Discord today, where you have, these chat rooms and you can chat through audio and video, of course, if you want. Back then it was pure audio, and it would just be a bunch of people like, pressing control and then going at it. And when you not don't press control, you're basically like muted, and then you just listen to others and chat in the comments like, yo, that's so dope, and all these things. So the reason all of this is important is because it's coming up with how technology grew, how opportunity grew, how the internet grew. All these things were really connected, but also it's about being ready to take advantage, and take advantage of the opportunity, seize it basically, of what's in front of you, because it's that whole line that people say. It's something like, those who don't plan to fail, and those who plan, basically they, hopefully follow the plan. In 2014, I basically saw who I was worshiping as an idol and multiple idols in the beatbox scene, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're there. And you're basically getting access to what you thought were dreams. They're basically coming alive in front of you, and it's like what you really cared about in your head. Imagine you're dreaming, imagine you get it. That feeling, it's insane. I can't even describe it in words. And that same feeling was so not just validating, reassuring. That was just like, that's the cherry on top. It was more like you're living in the present, you're happy, you just feel that you're in this aura of excellence, and also people that actually understand you based on, they know how much work it, takes to get to where you were at that point, and all the steps, all the iterations, like for anyone who's, example, making videos like this, they may understand something other than not. Maybe someone who's climbed the corporate ladder, that person at the top really knows, hopefully, what you went through. It's just that journey. That person who's ahead, they can kind of know, okay, I see where you are, man, and you can do it, and this is what you got to do to get to the next step. And that's what I want to give you in this video. So that experience in 2014, before I graduated college, it basically opened my eyes. And this is important because I basically was like, this is insane. I basically had no physical presence of beatbox whilst I was in India. And in America, I thought it was more widespread than it was. And even though it wasn't, the community was very tight, very loyal followers, very serious and disciplined about the craft, the art, etc. And I was like, this is amazing. Come 2015, come 2016, I'm basically graduating college. When I turned 18 back in 2012, I basically got my first credit card. And this is important for the next step because it wasn't about debt and whatnot, but it was about that, hey, my corporate America job after I graduated college really came from the fact that someone remembered me in my freshman year of orientation as, hey, you're the beatboxer. And I would have never remembered them, to be very honest. And that same person, basically, I had my friend and they had a resume, and I was like, okay, he's a good guy. Can you kind of help out with the next step? And they were like, of course, like, we haven't even talked in like 4 years, but they just remembered me and they were like, you're a solid dude, like all these things. And I was like, thank you very much. And before you know it, I basically got my first job out of college, not even like a referral because they know my work, but they were like, okay, we know this person and here you go. And of course I needed to smash the interviews and that worked out. And I basically was in the field of consulting, whether you call it management consulting, IT consulting, but basically a higher paying job than not out of my undergrad degree without a master's. And that was my first like way of really making, more money than like, let's say minimum wage. And, it's still a job, but a higher paying job than at the time. Medium paying job was around 30, 35, 50 grand was kind of pushing it. So this was kind of that between that 50 and hundreds range. All of this to say that me getting my first card when I was 18 and now having this kind of cash flow coming in and me always being frugal, slash, always kind of trying to maximize and optimize situations, and then me loving to beatbox, it was basically a skill that I had that I loved and I wanted to explore further into. And really, what was stopping me from going to the World Champs, which was in Germany at the time, was basically me thinking, oh my gosh, an international flight or a flight, it's like impossible. Like, how are you ever going to get there or save up enough money for a 3-day event or even to go for a week? And then where are you going to stay? What are you going to eat? All these things. So it was all these like kind of limiting beliefs of it's not possible or I got to save up a lot or blah blah blah. The point being here, I basically had a will and I figured out a way. I wasn't borrowing on credit. It was basically using credit card points to travel around the world to see different events, to compete in them. And this really was the next part of how it accelerated me to be at the top of the industry. When it came to everything beatboxing, I basically never really surpassed maybe top 15 ish or more or less in America. And that sounds really great. And I'm not saying it's not. But in the end, we all love the craft. We may not be doing it to be the number one rapper, the number one dancer. It's really like once you're at that level, like there's an understanding like, hey, the 100 people in America or 200 that beatbox at a certain level, they're like, all right, you love it, you're good, and you love to beatbox. This was important because I was learning from the ground level and kind of just doing the thing, getting better at it without really any ulterior motive or objective or anything extra. And this matters because when it came to credit cards, points, and miles, I was using that whole concept that exists to travel for free, as many people say, not for business class or first class. It was to take a bunch of economy flights and stay in economic type of situations to now go from competing to learning the business angle by not just absorbing videos on YouTube, just how I learned, but then seeing them like how what makes a successful event, what goes into it, who are the players, what's the next step, how do vendors work, how does revenue work apart from tickets, like merch sales, affiliate marketing if applicable, sponsorships, and then translating that also to online if you're making views, and then you basically have a channel, and not just a YouTube channel, but a way to, let's say, post videos online, and then that has, let's say, ad revenue like on YouTube, but maybe other platforms there's a different monetization model. This story goes from me being basically zero to, let's say, one of the top in terms of the performance angle or the competition angle, but then who is the person who's running the competitions? And so basically one of the own community members, aka myself, but then leveraging this tactic for me to travel to learn. But then now here's basically the graduation of all of this is basically then being able to take everything back, bring it back to the US, and then officially now, clearly I can say after the fact, 3+ years of having America's largest international beatbox battle event. That's basically the high level label. And then even from basically this place, where I'm recording this video from, was basically when COVID happened. It was basically the online world championships, basically the biggest event period ever was happening on the internet connection I had with other folks that were part of the community where we were all under one roof and executing upon the thing. It's definitely not me or like 2, 3, 4, 5 people. It's a bigger, kind of everyone coming together for basically that many more people. Point of the story being it all started from me basically having some type of curiosity to ask my friend, how did you do that? And there's a lot of side quests that happen along the way. I got to go to the Ellen show, Ellen DeGeneres, backstage, where I was playing a pseudo agent for my friend who went super viral beatboxing, and he didn't know English at the time. He was like, "Hey, is this real? Is this actually the show?" And I was like, "All right, let's give him a call. Let's see what's going on." And those type of opportunities, it's basically supporting folks as they grow, and then as folks are growing, as long as you don't have like malicious intent, it's basically all of us coming together, figuring it out together, and then winning together. And that's like the beauty of life. So taking it 10 steps back, basically the blueprint, if you look at the timeline, We're talking like 2007. And now it's been like 17 and a half years. And I guarantee you, it doesn't take 17 and a half years to do, all of this other than all the little details and nuance that you learn just after you know a good foundational amount of information. And then over time, you're basically incrementally learning that much more. Point being, beatbox skill wise, you can learn everything I learned maybe in 2.5, 3 years. The flow, yeah, maybe that takes longer, but the point is it is doable. From a business perspective, if you know other event businesses in just the world, not just America necessarily, then that same skill set can be used for other events that are thrown in, whether the beatbox industry, whether live concerts, whether maybe it's some kind of convention, etc. The reason I went into this much minutia up till this point in the story is because if you think about each and every step that was taken, and I'll hyperanalyze this bit by bit, it really started off first with curiosity. And trust me, this is going to sound like a, 5 steps to achieve anything you want in life type of tips, but when you drill down, you kind of can see that, hey, the curiosity, that first bit, was me being kind of open to things, not closed minded off, not how other people looked at me like, yo, this guy's kind of whack. Why is he, kind of, trying to cover his mouth and, make these sounds and stuff. Oh, he doesn't want to spit everywhere. But all of those judgments aside, the point is there was progression into something, whether it was through the curiosity and learning maybe one thing and going deeper, or that curiosity allowing you to open your mind to think about, hey, if I know this, then there's another thing that's connected to this, and then another thing, and then there's 5 more things. And then you realize that, hey, you're basically this horizon, you're widening your field of knowledge, for lack of a better term, versus just the depth. And in this case, I was learning both just over time. That same curiosity and just being open to opportunity, or just open to just being open, right? And just sharing, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm doing. Or just attracting that outside energy from others because they can, whether you want to say they sense it, whether they see it, however, you think about it. The point is, if you're out there, you're showing up just like how someone, if they're going to the gym and they start looking better, maybe people either they notice or people say, hey, hey man, you've been working out, like what's going on? Hey, good for you, man, looking good. Like all these things are basically the energy, the transfer, right? And as whichever way some people think it's like, oh, it's a bunch of nonsense, it's a bunch of blarney. But what I think is that what I didn't know at the time was that folks around me were just surrounding me because I was just doing my own thing. I wasn't really paying attention. But then we were basically bonding in its own kind of way. So, in other words, converting that curiosity into sharing that curiosity with others. And then whoever wants to join in, great. And if they don't, that's still fine. But now you have this kind of community that y'all are kind of figuring it out together. And the community was pretty much what exacerbated all this type of growth because it was that curiosity for, okay, hey, I'm going to learn this. And then I wanted to learn it. I want to get better. I wouldn't, try to force, hey, like if you don't like beatboxing, you're weird. Like, but definitely if someone asked, I'm always there to tell them, yo, these are the basics. You can do it. You can do this in 2, 3 days. And then, it's that sense of like there's quick wins for the actual consumer. But again, I wasn't trying to like push, the information of how to do it. It was just me existing. And this point really means that I wasn't being, let's say, strategic on let me do the biggest event in the world 10 years from now or 5 years from now. Like the point I'm trying to say through this discussion is that I didn't have a clear goal because I wasn't really heading towards a path. And maybe when you're younger, you're allowed to discover, you're allowed to learn. And as you get older, maybe you got to be a little more calculated given time constraints, money constraints, other people got to take care of kind of constraints. But all of this to say that in the end of the end of the end, I got to learn a lot because I allowed my quote unquote wings to, spread and just absorb everything, whether good or bad. But the time it took me to get this result, if I needed to repeat it, now I know how to do it. But if you tell me back then that I was going to do whatever the end outcome was, I wouldn't really believe it because I'd be like, where is the proof of concept that somebody else is doing this? And naturally, that really brings us to our next point. Seeing someone that you know in your personal circle or, being connected, whether it's friendship or a guy you once knew or an acquaintance or that random talk at the airport bar where you're like, yo, what's up, man? Yo, what's up, man? What's going on? Where are you going to? What's the reason? And you go to that back and forth and you realize, dang, there is so much out there. Same reason why people say, hey, go travel, go see culture, get cultured, all those things. But really, it's about, 8 billion people on this planet and X amount of countries. If you just think about the minutia of different experiences, there's a reason, like the encyclopedia, if you keep reprinting it over many years, there's that much either new information, and good luck memorizing it all. And I'm sure someone out there has, but I think you get my point. It's like the internet, it's infinite. In short, there's not enough time to know everything about everything. And so sometimes seeing that path that you're trying to go on, and then you see someone just 2 steps ahead, or 5 steps ahead, or 10 steps ahead, and then you identify with them, and hopefully, right, they also resonate with you. That's even better versus, let's say, hey, you're paying someone for their time and they're kind of like, oh, it's a job. I'm just kind of spending time talking to you. And this is cool. But like after this, I'm peace. I'm never going to see you again. Like that's a different outcome. But in this situation, having either guidance, whether you want to go to elders or people that have, kind of done the thing and they're willing to teach now, pass on that knowledge, or you're just curious and you go up to them or you try to add value to them, to be close to them, to then convert into absorbing knowledge faster. And when you're younger, you're able to do more, and when you're able to do more, you're basically able to add more value to the person who may have less time to do the thing, even though they could. So it's like a mutually beneficial situation, and you're able to absorb that much more information and ability to execute that much faster. And up till now, it's basically information if you think about it. From the curiosity, it's hey, I'm learning information. Yes, I'm doing the thing, but I'm able to learn information. The community part, you're able to share the information. Yeah, you can digest information, you can learn things, but you're kind of still like knowing how to do the thing. You're not really doing the thing. And even the people that you're helping, like what example we just went over, you're basically able to take their lessons, avoid certain mistakes. But until you do it, you won't know that next step, which leads us to the next thing I want to mention. Getting older, getting qualified, getting, whatever, credible in society, if you want to use that term. The point of the story is I was able to have cash flow that was coming in, and I was saving X amount. I was able to do, certain investments, certain things, and in the end, I had, let's say cash parked aside for these type of ventures, as well as a strategy over time of how to execute on said venture. And so I was willing to do it. I had information under my belt. I had even more research by traveling online, like abroad, in different places, different countries, networking, all the things. And then I was able to do it for the first time, that too, not necessarily alone, even though it was, let's say, my resources up front at that time. The point is we were able to come together and then figure out how to do it the one time, then the second time, how to do it better, how to include other players, et cetera, and just kind of exponentially grow the thing. Simply put, execution is everything because now you basically are able to have done the thing, but now how do you do it better? How do you optimize it? How do you grow it? How do you scale it? How do you basically make it a bigger company? And depending on the industry, there may not be that company structure or what have you. But the key lesson here is to go from zero to the top. It's pretty much like that expression of crabs in a bucket. If you're trying to rise to the top in a bucket full of crabs, they basically, once you're almost at the top, they grab you down. The point here is the people that you surround yourself around, that always, that it's famous expression, right? You are the average, your net worth is the average of the five people around you. You know what I'm saying? So the point is, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And that doesn't mean just money. That could mean your thought process, your motivation, why don't I have a six pack? If you ask me, I'm not saying people around me don't have a six pack either, but yeah, that is true at this very moment. And chances are in your own life, if you're trying to say, hey, why am I not a billionaire? Now, a billionaire, there's only, let's say, 3K of them in the world. Okay, I understand. Why am I not a 10 millionaire? I'm sure that number is multifold bigger, but it's about who you surround yourself around. Also, if you're a leech, if you're useless, if you don't have utility, like these things, I don't need to tell you. I think you probably know, like, hey, what is the value I provide to the marketplace? What am I willing to do? What am I willing to support? Some people may want to be very wealthy and they know, hey, there is a way in the oil industry or maybe, the tobacco industry, and maybe they don't identify with those type of industries and they know there's money, but they don't want to associate with them. And I'm not saying that's the only place where money exists, but that is a conscious choice of, okay, if you don't want to do X, but you know that X gives you the Y result, then that's obviously it's your choice and it's not right or wrong. But the point is you're in control is the point that I want to bring across to you. So if you look at the step by step, it's basically going from, having that curiosity or willingness to be like, all right, I'm either in the trenches or however you want to think about it. You don't need to be at the bottom in a bad position. You could be at the bottom and willing to say to yourself, all right, well, I see myself at the top. I don't know when, but with having, let's say, the discipline, the habits, the base amount of skill set, and then the way to, if you know the concept of synergy, where 1 + 1 = 3, it's bringing your, skill set plus someone else's, and then that having compounding results or an outcome can be that much bigger than yourself, you're basically able to add value to the market. As every kind of high level video that doesn't give you the step by step, they say, how do you become wealthy? Add value to the market. And I used to think when I'm younger, I'm like, what in the world does adding value to the market even mean? It's like, it made no sense to me. But what I realized is that the value that you think is valuable, and there's going to be one big caveat here, but the value that you love to spend time creating even more value from that value, however you want to put it. So in my case, beatboxing, I wanted to keep beatboxing, keep beatboxing, keep beatboxing. But the point is what? If you look at one big and simple truth, it's called TAM, I would call it total addressable market. If your whole market is just an example, right? Let's say it's worth $500,000. That is not going to make you a millionaire because there's not even $1 million worth of attention per se in that quote unquote industry or, minute economy. And so at the bigger thing, if you're trying to now, let's say, hey, let me get into the water industry. So apart from all regulation and all certain things, basically, if you make the best drinkable packaged water, whether it's packaging or the water's that dang good, the point is you're competing with all these other competitors in that same market. The pie is huge, and how you can get a sliver of it, it's basically answering the simple question of, do you prefer 1% of, let's say, $1 million, which is $10,000, or do you prefer, let's say, maybe 0.01% of a $100 billion industry, which at that point, if you do the math, is $1 million off the top of my head, and I hope I'm right. But if you look at that difference, 10,000 times a million, that's 100x difference. The beautiful part about everything we discussed is that if you use not even all these tactics, if you just have these kind of traits in other parts of your life, even if you don't want to be number one, you could be on that path. And it's up to you if you want to even go that far. I'll give you an example. When it comes to corporate America, I basically didn't know what in the world I was entering into. Got my degree, I was like, let's make money. And all I knew was, hey, let me get the thing because I wanted the outcome. I didn't care about the job, learning on the job. I didn't even know what it entailed, to be very honest. I was just looking at money because that money could mean not buying Lambos and all these things, but money could be used for investing, for trading, for figuring out the bigger picture to build an empire of, let's say, real estate at the time, and then a big stock portfolio, and etc. And crypto as well at the time. So the point being, all of this to say that I joined this thing that I didn't even know, but I was just being myself, kind of, going along the path, and I was growing in every other way that was not corporate America because I didn't have these same qualities, even though I was spending, let's say, the 8 or 10 hours, including commuting, at this place 5 days a week. But because I wasn't really open to the situation, I didn't really get anything in return. It's not like I was adding that much value. It was like a lot of wasted time and something like that. I was, very stressed and different mental health, kind of thinking through like what's going on, what does this matter, blah blah blah. And within a year of working, I was basically able to secure this house right here, not fully paid in cash, but having a good credit score, having those principles, having good credit, having certain down payment, knowing how to trade, which is how I got the down payment in both the cryptocurrency markets, which are open 24/7, as well as the stock market. And so I was spending all my time doing the stuff that I really cared about, which added value to the things I was looking for in life and what I considered as valuable. But if you look at it from a skill sets perspective, I don't think I learned anywhere near what I could have, should have, or otherwise. In my own defense, I felt that I was creating more value than I could get, let's say, trading my time for money irrespective. And I always looked at these skills like scalable, like where you earn a certain amount, you can basically scale it up. So if your trade, let's say 1% profit of $1,000 trade is $10. So 1% of $1 million now is 10,000. If you got 10 million, then that's a million at 1%, etc., etc. So this corporate America example in my first couple of years of working is a great example of, hey, if I can show up, physically, and at that time it was like pre-COVID, no work from home, remote, none of that. It was weird if you weren't there. Point being, I was present, but I wasn't truly present on that facet. In other facets, I was hugely, immensely, 1,000,000% present. And that's the key distinction. If you want something and you have conviction to go get that something, then if you aren't already, then I would question you, why aren't you? And if you're on the path and you're kind of thinking, I don't know, is it really going to work out? If I've been doing this for years, what if it's not going to work out? What if you actually stop having those thoughts and think purely, not circling around through that, am I going to get out of this rut? Am I going to, move forward? Is this worth it? Someone's telling me I suck. Like all these things, right? In the end of the day, if you're willing to do it and you figure out that, okay, hey, I have a base skill set, step one, and I'm trying to sharpen that skill set. that skill set is, let's say, value. It may not be valuable to everyone, but it's valuable to either yourself to motivate you to keep on going, or valuable to someone who actually is willing to spend on said value skill set. And once you take that sharpened skill set, you can add other skills to your tool belt, whether that's going from, let's say, hey, I have enough skills. Let's say I speak basic English. I can do minimum wage jobs. I'm younger. I'm mobile. I can make sandwiches at Subway, which I used to work at Subway back in the day for a short stint, but it was a great experience because I was learning Spanish back in the day, and then I could talk to my coworkers, and they invited me to their daughter's quinceañera, and I was like, no, I'm good, fam. I got other plans. Point being, I'm able to talk with others, to socialize, to do certain things, and I realized, I can do better than this, and then that proved to me that okay, $12 an hour somewhere, or 16 bucks change at my first internship. I remember 16.75 is a big deal. And I learned that, okay, this is cool, but can I see myself here for 40 plus years? No, no way I cannot. Then the next step, your more bigger boy job, as I was saying, post college, and, between that 1500 range, it was a big deal in the sense of, okay, a lot of things were unlocked, a lot of things were out of the way. And so, but that was like the next step for me to understand, okay, I have these skill sets I can stack, 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 stack. And I used to ask other people this question like, hey, how can I earn, $1 million a year? And if you look at it like 40 hours in a week, at the time I was thinking in that way, like every job is 40 hours. So 40 hours times 50 weeks is 2,000 hours. Who is going to pay me reasonably in the marketplace 500 bucks an hour, which 500 times 2,000, if you do that, that's 5 zeros plus 10. So 6 zeros, that's $1 million. Yeah. So 500 bucks a year, an hour was basically like unheard of. I was like, who can afford that? Who's willing to do that? Then at the time, it was like, okay, maybe lawyers, doctors, like specific surgeons within the doctor, whatever. And I didn't even realize that, okay, hey, a doctor could, in theory, have their own practice. A dentist could have their own, they are the dentist, but they also own the business. So they could have other people and it's more scalable. Like my brain was opening up at that time to the immense sheer just what there is out there and how it could be made through the scalable nature. And this was even before the internet started for me to realize where like the internet could be that gold mine of sorts. This point basically speaks to, okay, you have the skills, you either are doing it in a fixed way. So in other words, let's say you're a maid service. You're the number one maid and people say you clean so well, I'll give you $100 an hour. If you want to make 5 million in a year, you can't keep working at 100 bucks an hour. It's mathematically impossible. So even if you work 24 hours, whatever that math is, $2,400 times 365, yeah, it comes pretty close actually. But the point of the story being that you having, let's say, two, three other mates where maybe they pay you, pay them, hey, it's not you, I only want to pay them 50. So you tell someone, hey, I'll pay you 15, 20 bucks an hour. And I basically handle the deal flow. You're the broker and everything's going through you in terms of the deals. And future state, you may not even clean anymore. You may hire even more people. And then, however you manage your client relationships, the overall point here is you took a skill, you either sharpen that skill on your own and you're the number one in that situation, or you created its own industry where you can affect even more people, where more money can inflow, and whether you're a broker, or the step three is basically you scale this thing where you have that many more people working under you. And at the future state, apart from the government, let's say, you still have your Coca-Colas of the world, your McDonald's, and it's not about the CEO at the top. It's about the chairman or the board that's behind them who, at the higher level, if anything ever happened to McDonald's financing, God forbid something happened, right? The government, they don't let the banks fail. I'm not saying they won't let McDonald's fail, but the point is, somewhere, somehow, through connections and through how people know each other, you're almost protecting that bottom level where, because of your skills, you got to a certain level. And then now, funny enough, because of the same people the same skill set you have, you can either recoup. If you went from zero, you can come back faster. If you need, some connection, some help, that could be possible. And chances are, if you weren't kind of idiotic, you can take some of the gains that you have along the way and then park them aside. And that really goes into personal finance, management, and those type of things. But to be the top of the industry, you basically have to surround yourself with the players, and the players are not going to surround themselves around you unless you have that much value of either the same industry, tangential industry, something obviously personal slash not calling it blackmail, but that is a total different, like, I'm not counting that in this example. So the point is, it's about, not just the who for lack of just a blanket statement, but it is about that overall and overarching relationship. Because what is wrong by being, let's say, someone in whatever industry, the bush cutting industry, and shrubbery, you're making it look all cool and all. What's wrong with then knowing the guy who basically paints on the asphalt, basically different lines and different type of paint on the ground. The point is that may be next to each other. And maybe that's a mutual type of business relationship where both of them come into these projects together where, hey, there happens to be a lot of shrubbery, maybe on the highways, maybe that's a government contract. So all of this to say there's infinity ideas, but it's really about, hey, are you going to go deeper and be that number one SME, subject matter expert, or are you going to be willing not to be as hands-on potentially just because you got to manage a lot, but it's your choice. Do you want to manage one person's work who may not be as good as you, but you're like, you know what, they're doing my work and it's great? Or do you want to manage, let's say, thousands of people or hundreds of people where, you hope they're doing a good job, but in the end, you're getting a cut of each of those people's whatever, in terms of income or deal flow, and then you're basically wealthier. So it's not money versus where you want to be in terms of an industry. But if you look at artists, you can see that industry. It's basically, hey, I'm an artist. I don't care if I'm rich or I'm not, but doesn't really feel like they're not purely logical. They have that creative element, and that's a trade-off. In the end, my name is Lalit Devraj, and the reason I'm making this video is because how I got to where I am today, it wouldn't be without YouTube. So me sharing all of this, basically there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of details I've left out and there's a lot of details I included. And I appreciate you for coming to the end. Point being that if you want to do something, you can do it. How well you want to do it, it's up to you. How high you want to go up the ranks, could be a mix of what you know and who you know. And then more than that, yeah, sure, you can say a sprinkle of luck, like Salt Bay. And then more than that, of course, the closer you are to the faucet or, the drain or the pipe, in other words, if I call it government funding, where money's printed, if money is the angle, then closer to that region, whether it's banking or even at the higher level, serving certain individuals that are in that example, multi-billionaire or let's say secret trillionaire status, of course, that's going to be there. But demand versus supply, there's the industry if you want to be at the top, or what do you consider yourself being at the top? What does that really mean to you? It could be the top of the industry, it could be the best version of yourself, it could be whichever way you want to slice the pie, but the steps are all the same. It's doing the thing, doing it well, doing it quote unquote perfectly in your own standards, and then obviously their societal standards, getting it up to there, then superseding their expectations, then figuring out how to spread that same skill, if it's teaching, or if it's the ability to learn even quicker, or if it's, hey, how to do X repeatedly, which may be hard, and now you have an easy way for folks to do it, or a convenient solution like what you see on Shark Tank. So there's a million ways, and if you came this far, truly thank you for watching. Consider subscribing,